empty seats so they can just sort of slip in, those who aren't as conscientious and can't get here right at 9:30. Thank you. So, my name is Eileen McCulley, and I'm a member of this congregation, which is one of the great joys of my life. This morning we are fulfilling not one, but two of our goals as a congregation. One, to serve our community, and two, to make the world a better place by advocating for social justice. So thank you for being here and being part of that. Just by coincidence, this morning's sermon is also a criminal justice topic. We will be hearing about snitch testimony from that man right there, Mark Weber, who just walked in. So please consider joining us for that. There'll be a little talking, a little singing, a little listening, a little time for meditation, and we'll do our best to make you feel welcome. So I'm a member here. I'm also a member of the Bail Reform Working Group of the Coalition. That is the Coalition to Stop the Inhumanity at the Cuyahoga County Jail. The Coalition is a group of citizens that came together to respond to the catastrophic crisis at our local county jail. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the story. There have been 9 deaths, countless episodes of brutality at the hands of corrections officers, a lack of edible food, lack of access to medical care, and general lousy, squalid conditions for living, unsafe and unsanitary. So when the Coalition began looking at that problem, one of the first things we noticed was that a lot of that is driven by overcrowding. There's simply too many people in that building. The county's been ignoring the upper limit number for a decade or more. When we dug a little further, we learned that overcrowding is driven in part by an over-reliance on cash bail. There's a lot of people in the jail who have not yet been to trial, but they can't get out because they can't pay their bail, and we're going to talk about that in great detail. And while we were considering the problem at our jail, there was this rising chorus from municipalities around the nation protesting that bail was being used in a way that was leading to unnecessary, unjust, and unfair incarceration, mostly of poor and black people. So bail reform is a hot topic in the national conversation about criminal justice right now. But here in Northeast Ohio, one of the loudest voices calling for bail reform is the Ohio ACLU. And we are fortunate to have with us this morning the leader of Ohio ACLU's bail reform campaign. She is Melekta Malaku. Melekta has been a stalwart friend of the Coalition, donating countless hours to consulting with us and helping us understand the issues. She has extensive experience canvassing and organizing on behalf of issues related to environmental justice, mass incarceration, voting rights, and environmental justice, and access to quality education. And after graduating from Case Western, Melekta devoted a year serving with the educational nonprofit City Year before joining the staff at Ohio ACLU. She's with us today to lead our discussion, so please join me in welcoming Melekta.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so my name is Melekta Malaku. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm the campaigns manager at the ACLU of Ohio. So my role primarily is to do campaign strategy and community mobilization around the issue of bail and our reliance on bail reform in the state. So the purpose of this panel, and really our intention, is to give you a full overview of the campaign, starting with what is our vision, what do we want from bail reform, which is something that a lot of people don't go into. What are some of the mechanics of the pretrial system? What are some of the traumas that people experience being held pretrial, being put in jail? They've not been formally convicted of a crime. These are still innocent individuals. And what are we going to do about it? So I'm here with a group of amazing volunteers who've devoted, again, countless hours of their time, their energy, their conceptual labor to think about this work very deeply, to learn about it, and to go into the community and do exactly what we're doing now, educating and mobilizing around this issue. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Lori Albright. I, as Melecta said, is a member of this working group, which has been wonderful. My pronouns are she and her. I feel called to be involved with this issue after reading the Federal Marshal's report in the newspaper a year ago about the conditions at the county jail. And as a member of Puncture the Silence, we collaborated with Black Lives Matter Cleveland and called groups together to say, I think we need to mobilize and do something about this. The education that I have gotten in working on this issue has been phenomenal. I never realized how complex the justice system in Cuyahoga County is, but there are clearly things that can be done and we can mobilize, and I am really committed to seeing that happen because this is here in my backyard.
Oh, you know what, I was standing on it, Laura, you should be able to now.
Good morning, my name is Eileen Viscano. I became a part of this group when I read in the newspaper the conditions at the county jail and said, human beings should never be treated this way. I've got to do something about it. And then I discovered these wonderful people who are already studying what to do about it and how we got here. We have a long way to go. I will be happy to share with you this morning the impact of being in a jail, particularly when you know full well that you haven't been convicted of anything. And now, here's Jeff. Oh, my pronouns are she and her.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Fabulous. My name is Jeffrey Crosby. My pronouns are he and him. You can call me Jeff though. No problem. I work for the May Dugan Center. I'm a trauma intervention specialist. I'm also part of a nonprofit called Voice for My People and Save Our Sons. I've been working on this project a long time because I see it has a deleterious effect on the people in my community. It's disproportionate numbers of black males, black women also, as well as poor white people that live in this county, as well as Latinos that are incarcerated. And it's like the new form of slavery. It's like the new Jim Crow. It's like the 13th Amendment says. This is the only legal form of slavery, and they got our people in bondage, so we're striving to free them.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi. Good morning.
My name is Alexander Chavers. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a recent college graduate, political science as well as communications. And the reason I've been getting involved as a volunteer with the ACLU bail working reform campaign group is because I want to know on a local level within my own community, how can I get involved in issues that are having a serious effect on, people who live in my area, people who look like me, and how can I really take action in an organization that works with public engagement to solve these problems of the 21st century.
Nice, okay, let's start with some basics. Can we hear about what actually is bail?
Bail is a guarantee, usually involving cash, as a promise that you'll appear in court again. Normally, it's a condition of release before trial. My colleague will tell you about some various types of bail.
Yes, in the state of Ohio, we recognize three main
Mike's on,
Can you put it closer to your mouth,
or
Alex?
it might be shut off.
Oh, is it
It's
not?
on.
Push it up, yeah.
It's up.
Can you all hear me now?
No,
Yeah.
no,
Okay.
no, it's still on, still on.
Still,
Sorry, there's something wrong with it.
Here, take this one till we can fix that.
Something wrong with it.
how about?
Oh,
Hear me now?
yeah.
Okay. Yes, in the state of Ohio, there are three main types of bail that are recognized by the law. And these typically fall into the two categories, secured and unsecured. Secured is basically when the defendant pays money up front as a guarantee that they're going to appear for their court date. Unsecured is typically when the defendant will sign a document. It's basically a written obligation saying that they're going to be paying a penalty of a certain amount should they not appear in court. Now, the three types of bond release by Ohio law are personal, standard, and surety. Personal falls into the category of unsecured, like I mentioned earlier. The defendant signs a written statement saying that they'll appear in court. The standard bond release is typically when the defendant will pay 10% of the bail amount, and that's basically secured to ensure that they'll appear in court. And once the trial is over, that 10% deposit, they get 90% of that refunded back to them. Now, if their trial ends with a not guilty verdict or the charges are dismissed, they'll get 100% of that deposit. But if the defendant does not show up for court, then typically that means the deposit is dismissed. A warrant might be issued for their arrest. The third type, surety bond, and this is also falls under the category of secured. This is when the defendant pays usually a cash amount to ensure that they'll appear. Either the defendant or somebody like a friend or family will pay that up front. And I would really want to hammer home that cash bail is typically the driving component here. Yes, property or assets can be used as a surety, but it's typically cash, especially in the state of Ohio, that ends up running this process. An option, if the defendant cannot afford the bail, is to hire a bail bondsman, which is another for-profit option, in which the defendant pays 10% of the total bail amount, usually plus a premium. That operates as the surety. It sounds like the standard bail option, but the difference here is that none of that's going to get refunded back to the defendant. That's what the bail bondsman makes. And typically, the way that bail is set is by the judge using a bond schedule. And this is basically an amount, the bail money that's going to be paid. It's set based on factors such as, does the judge think that there's a risk that the defendant is going to flee and not show up for court? Other factors such as past criminal history, place of residence, and according to Criminal Rule 46, if the case involved assault with a deadly weapon, do they think that the defendant is going to be a danger to the victim or a danger to any of the witnesses that may be called before court? And the issue here is that the judge has a lot of discretion in this area, and that's what we want to address at the ACLU, because cash bail typically operates almost like the judge is just stacking dollar bill after dollar bill that the defendant has to pay. And in a lot of cases, well, in actually half the cases where people are bailed out, usually the trial, the charges are dismissed. What does that tell you? That typically, it probably, whatever they were charged for wasn't that serious. And the cash bail system at the national level is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's up to about $2 billion at this point. And what we assume is that money is the best option in assuring that someone will appear before court. Right. But bail is supposed to keep people out of jail. It's not supposed to put more people in. And the vast majority of people who constitute the rise in mass incarceration ever since 1970 are typically people held during this pre-trial stage. And in terms of costs, on the national level, it costs American taxpayers about $38 million a year. The state of Ohio, it's about $65 a day to keep someone locked up, giving them food, shelter, all the basic amenities. And even a conservative think tank called the Buckeye Institute estimated that it would save Ohio taxpayers about $67 million a year for bail reform. So it doesn't need to be a partisan issue, because all across the board, this is a civil liberty. And if you want to be constitutional about it, the 8th Amendment prohibits excessive bail. What is that for poor people, what they can't afford? Because in a lot of cases, typically median amount of bail can be up to about 8 months of personal income for the typical defendant.
Thanks very much. Did you want to jump in and say something?
Yeah, I wanted to lift some of the amazing points that Alex brought up. So just, again, if you're new to the entire bail system and really new to mass incarceration, think of bail as the front door to mass incarceration. Because just as Alex mentioned, people get trapped in that front door. They can't pay. A judge says, you know, there's an allegation here. I don't have a lot of information about who this person is, what role they have within the community. I don't know if this person has children. I have very little information about this person except the charge, a police report, and again, think about how many people are going through Cuyahoga County's jail system, for instance. Maybe they have 20, 30 seconds to make that initial bail determination. So they're giving this individual $500, $600, $700, bail amounts. They're assigning them bail amounts with no information, and immediately that person is placed in a cage, being held. The response that they're receiving is punitive, even though, again, these people are still technically innocent. They have not been formally convicted of a crime. They're still innocent. They're in jails, as we know, in the height of a conditional crisis for Cuyahoga County. And a lot of these overcrowding and conditional issues we're also seeing in Hamilton County, in Franklin County. This is a state issue, this is a national issue, and cash bail, Ohio's unnecessary reliance on cash bail, is really opening the door to that kind of misery, that kind of trauma, and that kind of further incarceration. And one thing that I did want to bring up that Alex brought up, 90% of cases are resolved through plea bargains, through plea deals. So oftentimes, people find themselves in jail. They know that they might lose their job. They know they might lose their home. They don't want to survive in those type of conditions. They don't want to, expose themselves to that kind of trauma, and they take a plea. And from there, and Jeff is going to talk a little bit more about some of those personal impact. But from there, they're finding themselves caught within the collateral consequences and walking into the mouth of a monster, as Jeffrey has told me in the past when we talked about this issue. So again, if you want to take a couple more minutes to think about the different definitions and go through the system, and if you can only leave with one thing from this conversation, from this panel, know that bail is that front door of mass incarceration. You are entering in a system that's very, very difficult to get out of.
And I'd like to just quickly add, one in which you buy your presumption of innocence.
So, can we walk through, what happens when you get arrested? What happens at that point?
Well, when the police officer or any other law enforcement official, they're gonna claim you have probable cause, or they're gonna say you have a warrant, and they're gonna arrest you. And they're gonna read your Miranda rights, and then you go to processing. And that's when you enter that mouth of the monster. And this monster has tentacles that can affect every facet of your life. Once you go behind that bar, you hear that cage shut, the door, it's over. You know that's reality. Stuff is real. The lockdown is overloaded. It's not safe. They don't have the guards to protect people, so you can possibly get hurt in there. There's a lot of people sick with mental illness and also physical illness. And they're very parsimonious with the resources, so nobody is helping them. And you get depressed, you're estranged from your family because you cannot afford bail. And when you're estranged from your family, that can cause long-term effects. It causes divorce, it causes other family issues because you're not there for them. It causes depression, and then you're gonna take a plea bargain. Like my colleague said, 90% of the cases take plea bargains because people wanna get out of that county jail so bad, they'd rather go to prison. And it's sad that you wanna trade jail to go to another place that doesn't even help you at all. You wanna go to a place that will probably make you worse, because you want to get out those squalid conditions so bad. And you have so much invectives toward the system, you're mad at the world.
Eileen, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the human impact?
So you can't make bail, you probably can't afford a lawyer, so now you're in the county jail. And what do you lose? You lose time from work, the ability to earn a living. If you're there long enough, which happens to a lot of people, you'll lose your job, you don't show up. You'll lose your apartment, you can't pay the rent, you're not there to take care of it. Or your home because you can't pay the mortgage. No work, no pay, no rent, no mortgage. You lose the help of family and maybe the custody of your children. You're not there for them. You can lose public benefits. If you're on disability, you may lose disability because you can't get it if you're living in an institution. The jail is called an institution. You lose direct access to hygiene products. Even a bar of soap may cost you as much as $3, money you didn't have in the first place. You lose access to adequate medical care. No services or even understanding of mental health problems. Only now are authorities talking about providing the services of a nurse. At least a third of the Cuyahoga County Jail residents suffer from some kind of mental illness. Jails have replaced mental hospitals for detaining them. You lose the ability to build a defense. No phone, no outside contact. Public defenders have big caseloads. Every time they must ask for a continuance, it's a delay. Your time in jail increases. You can lose any comforts of home. At the county jail, you may be sleeping on the floor in an overcrowded cell where lockdown is sometimes 23 hours a day because they don't have the personnel to let people have a little bit of walk around. You lose your dignity. Crime is a mistake, but even people who make mistakes are human beings. You lose hope. With a system so tangled and broken, it takes a monumental effort to be hopeful. If you're convicted, you lose your Medicaid. If you weary of the jail conditions, as Jeff said, you may be encouraged to take a plea deal. So now you're free. But with a criminal record which bars you from housing, employment, bank loans, the county jail is a big loser.
Jeff, did you want to jump in and say something else?
Yes, I also want to add that the judges, we need not forget them. They have so much discretion in this, like my colleagues already said. So they might not like how you look. They might look at your zip code. They might get mad if you're part of the LGBT community. They just get mad at everything. And not even mad, it's just their personal biases, and it affects their decision making. They might wake up on the wrong side of bed, say, you don't deserve bail today, or you need an exorbitant amount of bail. So we need to look at these factors also. The judge has so much discretion, and they do what they want. Money talks in this game.
And it isn't only the judge. I once asked the court administrator for a flow chart of what happens if you get arrested in Cuyahoga County. Can you figure out what will happen to you? There isn't any. It depends on the municipality where you were arrested. Maybe they have a local jail. Maybe they share with somebody else. Your bail may be set by the officer that arrested you, or a sheriff, or a clerk of courts, or maybe, if they have a judge ready, a judge you just don't know. Justice in this setting is a big if.
How about the scale of this problem?
So, how many people are affected by the cash bail system? Let's first look at the national level, and then we'll bring it down to here in Cuyahoga County. On the national level, roughly 500,000 people languish in jail because they can't afford the bail. 70% of the jail population are awaiting trial as we speak. Black people are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested than whites. They are also 2 times more likely to be detained than whites. Bail amounts for black men average 35% higher than those for white men, even controlling for the seriousness of the charge. After bail is set, black and Latino people are half as likely to afford bail as white people, largely because of the history of wealth accumulation discrimination in our country. These disparities are especially stark for low-level offenses. Here in Cuyahoga County, if you've read some of the reports in the Plain Dealer in their 3-year campaign to create more justice, you will note that the Cuyahoga County Jail has been overcrowded for many, many years, and it was exacerbated by the county plan to consolidate the municipal jails into the county jail. About a year ago, the county jail was built for a maximum of 1,765 people. About a year ago, the population was up to over 2,600 people. Right now, as of October 9th, there were 1,832 people, still over the capacity of the jail. Improvement, but we're not yet near where we want to be. To me, the most tragic piece of this is thinking about in our own backyard, right here in Cuyahoga County, of those 1,832 people, over half of them have not been found guilty of anything. Over 1,000 people presently are in our county jail because they cannot afford to get out. And let's think about what that looks like from the judge's perception, who's going to be making a determination on that person. If I have money and I'm accused of something and I can make my bail, I can be out in the community, I can be wearing street clothes, I can consult with my lawyer and help in my defense. I appear in front of the judge as part of the ongoing community. So there is, whether you like to think of yourself as a completely objective person or not, there is a presumption that I can continue to be a part of the community. Now let's think about if I'm poor and I can't make bail, I appear before the judge, perhaps in a jumpsuit, or perhaps even on a TV monitor from the jail, and so I appear like someone who belongs in the jail. So that information is going to be coming into my judgments as I go along there. I can't participate in my defense. Even people who have lawyers who are in jail because they can't make bail often don't get access to their attorneys because of the frequent lockdowns, so that they can't get out of their jail cell, their cage, in order to meet with their lawyer who has come to the jail to meet with them but can't get access to them. These are just a few of the things that are going on right here in our backyard.
And why does this keep happening? One estimate is that the annual profit from cash bail in the United States is $14 billion. The United States and the Philippines are the only countries that retain a cash bail system. Many of the bondsmen are insurance companies. Think about it.
And she's referring to the commercial bail industry here.
Okay, so what policy changes are we looking at?
Yeah, so thank you all for your amazing contributions and summaries of aspects of this issue.
You gotta hold it really close.
Oh, is this better? Okay, I want to keep it. So we know that bail is problematic on a legal level. We know it's a violation of due process rights. We know it's a violation of that 8th Amendment. We know it's problematic on a policy level because it's perpetuating the criminalization of poverty. We know it's problematic on a moral level because these folks are still innocent. They have not been formally convicted of a crime, and it compromises the moral integrity of the entire system. If people who are coming in, not being able to afford cash bail, and receiving completely different judicial outcomes versus people who have money. It has become a money system. It's created a two-tiered system of justice, as we know. So what are we going to do about it? I like to break down the policy solutions into 3 categories. Procedural safeguards for setting bail, it's extremely important. Transformation, cultural transformation, especially from our political officials, our elected representatives, and of course the accountability piece. And that relies on the community as well as our elected officials there. So what do I mean about setting procedural safeguards? That means we need to prioritize release. So that means decriminalizing where we can, looking towards community alternatives for incarceration, just, from the get-go. Let's go into this conversation saying, hey, we value pretrial liberty and we want to create a system, even if it is an incarceration system, that holds that value highly. So What else? Making sure that someone has bail determinations within 24 to 48 hours. So there was a situation in Cuyahoga County where if you got arrested on Friday and there wasn't a judge or magistrate that was available during the weekend, you could stay in jail 3 or 4 days before you even have that first appearance in front of the judge and get any bail determination at all. So making sure we have, speedy bail hearings so people actually get any type of bail determinations within a couple days and not waiting, and again, languishing in jail during that waiting period. That's extremely important. Individualized hearings. So at the ACLU of Ohio and many other civil liberties groups, we do not believe that bond schedules are constitutional. That's definitely another panel with our legal director, but they still create a situation where there's excessive bail for folks who can't afford it. So instead of having a bond schedule, let's have an individualized assessment. So someone comes up in front of a judge, and they have a sheet, a report from pretrial services that says, this person is part of the community, this is their job, these are more details about the case, and the judge can make an individual determination of what bail, what would guarantee this person reappears in court. So we're relying on individual assessments, instead of just a bond schedule that, you have 30 or 40 seconds for a judge to actually assign a bail to someone. That's extremely, extremely important. Data collection. So when I went into looking at this topic, when bail was almost like assigned to me at the ACLU as my campaign, I was flabbergasted that we didn't have strong data to support any of our pretrial programs, and I was wondering why. In federal prisons, in state prisons, we have really good data. It could be better, but we have some semblance of data. We have some infrastructure of data to collect and actually analyze. Jails are operated by your local county, your local district, and oftentimes it's created this shadowed reality that you don't really know what's going on in the jail, who operates the jail, and making sure that data collection is a priority. So if I called Cuyahoga County, right now, and I asked, how many people in your jail are being held pre-trial, it would take them a while for them to get those exact numbers, because we do not have a systemized data collection system that would allow us to take in this data, evaluate it as a community, or even evaluate it as a county, and say that these are the reforms that need to be made. So again, making data and transparency priority in the policy space. So accountability, and especially accountability from our judges and other elected officials. We need to monitor the bail decisions of our local judges. This is extremely important on a municipal level. This is extremely important on a county level, because as Alex mentioned, there's a lot of judicial discretion in this space. Judges, I would say, are our targets when we talk about this issue, and judges are also some of the hardest to hold accountable. Oftentimes people are voting for their judges, they don't really know what party they're affiliated to, they don't really know their records, and even though they might have glowing reviews from different bar associations, they might not be making the kind of decisions in their courtroom based on the values that we all know, and we want our judges to make value-based decisions within that system. So making sure we're monitoring the bail decisions of our judges, that's extremely important. And also monitoring the county and making sure that the county is accountable to these reforms. So if we have county administrators, if we have other judges, if we have local legislators that are saying, I want bail reform, ask them, what kind of bail reform do you want? Do you want the kind of bail reform that gives everyone a GPS monitor that they have to pay for? No, we don't want that. Do you want the kind of bail reform that still relies on commercial bail bondsmen and gives them, more access to the pretrial population? No, we don't want that. So making sure that any conversation we have about reform is specific, making sure there are actual points that we can hold up and say, if you're going to be a champion of this, what policy decisions are you making that you're actually going to champion? And so there are more wonky details of all the policy, all the policy answers to this, so to speak. But this is a start. And again, this is an ongoing conversation. It's not going to end just because we want all of judicial bond decisions to be recorded and archived for us. It's not going to end just because people are getting released, because again, they might just be released on a GPS monitor. This is an ongoing community conversation to change the bail system.
All right, thank you. Alex, what can people who are sitting here do to help in this effort?
Yes, first of all, you can go to the ACLU website, ohbailreform.com, and on the page you'll find a run through of like everything we discussed here, pretrial services, what is the impact, if you have a personal story to share, updates, what are we doing in the news recently, and how can you get involved in your local community. You can also join up with our Bail Reform Working Campaign Group. We meet every Thursday from 5 to 6 at the ACLU of Ohio office. That's 4506 Chester Avenue. And you can also get involved in one of the organizations that partners with us, like you were mentioning earlier, Stop the Inhumanity at the Cuyahoga County Jail. I know recently they just had a march protesting the inhumane conditions that are going on at the jail. And for organizations that want to get involved, you can also, through our website, sign on to our proposed amendments for Criminal Rule 46. Criminal Rule 46 establishes all procedures for setting bail. So if you're an organization who wants to get involved, you can contact me or Elected to sign on to the amendments. Also, you can download the toolkit through our through the website, ohbailreform.com. I think it's at the bottom of the page where you can click on a link that features the toolkit. And lastly, you can also support the Bail Project in Cleveland. It's 501c3 that basically assists people who need bail payments with pretrial services such as call and text reminders. You can send your donations, and I think that's pretty much it.
Very good, thank you. All right, we're gonna have some questions, but we're gonna pass out the clipboards that Susan has there. Please sign on if you are not on our email reminder list for future forums, and feel free to take a brochure. And we have 3 rules for Q&A. Our microphone holders choose the person asking the question, not the speaker. Keep your questions short, 2 speeches please. And hold the microphone very, very close to your mouth so everyone can hear. And I have one more request. Pat Dillard, if you wouldn't mind, Jeff wants pictures for his mom in Chicago. Jeff gives you his phone. Would you take some pictures? Go ahead. Can you? Yes, please.
It's on.
Oh,
Speak it.
It's on.
Okay, you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
As I was rushing out this morning, I just had time to glance at the headline, and I think it said that Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court was instituting some kind of bail reform on a trial basis. Could you tell us a little more what that's about?
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, so Cuyahoga County has been one of the urban jurisdictions in the state that has done probably the most on bail reform, even though it has been very stagnant. It did not go as fast as I would like. But some of the things that they've already instituted within the Cleveland Municipal Division are things like pretrial services to give people texting reminders, calling reminders to get them to court. They're also using a risk assessment tool, the PSA, and we're opposed to risk assessment tools, but this is something that other jurisdictions have used to, release people and give judges some legitimacy of their release decision. Right now, they're trying to create a centralized place for everyone to get booked, go through pretrial services, have that initial interview where people know, what are the individual considerations that judges should have to actually make a bail determination and make that decision. I think, again, this is positive news, but this has been very, very, very slow, and there are still aspects of the reforms that they've instituted that are problematic, like a risk assessment tool, for instance. It's a very racially tinged algorithm that, again, you put in racist data inside the algorithm, you get racist data out, and And then this idea of risk has a long history of black deviance, and this idea of who is risky and who is not. And we've seen those kind of outcomes with other areas that have instituted risk assessment tools. They're also doing things like giving people the GPS monitors, which again, folks have to pay for, and that really isn't pretrial justice. The stigma of having a GPS monitor, the kind of money you need to pay to actually have it, and kind of the false positives of like, hey, I live in a neighborhood where crime might be occurring. It beeps off because maybe 2 blocks down the street, somebody may be committing a crime, and now I have to report it, or now I'm potentially violating my pretrial conditions because of this GPS. So while I'm excited about these reforms, I'm not cynical, but I'm extremely skeptical. And I think we need to keep a close eye. We need to remain, putting pressure on our county officials. And we also have to ask, why is this taking so long? Why has this taken so long to occur?
Pat, I'd like to just add a couple of things to that. One is that Cuyahoga County did a task force on bail reform. It took them 2 years. It came out in March of 2018, and they established a quarterly justice council to begin to address it. And regarding the timeline, I think, we're frustrated that people are languishing in jail, and it's taken over a year for there to be some of these beginning reforms, which we are happy to see, but we're worried that they're fragile. And we really need to keep the pressure on.
Yeah, and can I just toss in, there's a role too for the prosecutor's office. In other municipalities, Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, prosecutors have become very active in instituting reforms. They can determine what kind of charges are made, how many charges are made on an individual. They can make requests about bail. And so, for example, they also, well, I'll leave it at that. The prosecutor could be doing a lot. Our prosecutor is not.
You mentioned earlier that the United States is just one of 2 countries where cash bail is prevalent. How do other countries handle incarceration before people are determined guilty?
The whole idea of bail is to make sure that a person will appear for the hearing. People can be signed out officially on their own recognizance. They can be asked to phone in at regular intervals, or to make personal appearance to somebody at regular intervals, as one might do with parole, or to be signed out on the cognizance of another person who will vouch for them and remind them to make their returns. Under those conditions, people do come back for their hearings, but it doesn't involve money.
So this is actually referring to commercial bail. So there is still instances of cash bail in other countries, but the commercial bail industry, bail bondsmen, the idea that insurance companies underwrite bonds, that is where the United States and the Philippines are the only 2 countries that allow this commercial industry to thrive. In other countries, this idea of pretrial liberty is very much heralded and followed through. So it's, you got arrested, you might go through some sort of individualized assessment, they may identify what needs you may have and direct you to social service agencies or direct you to nonprofits that could help, and then you get released. So there's very much this idea of pretrial liberty is something true, pretrial liberty is something that we should embody, and this idea that we have an entire commercial industry that donates to municipal races, donates to state races, is very much involved in our political processes. And Eileen just spoke about it a little bit, but part of the reason why our reliance on cash bail has exploded within the past 20 years is because of top bail bond industry leaders and their involvement in ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, a pro-privatization lobby that pushes, again, a lot of commercial industries that are on some murky ethical grounds, in my opinion, on a lot of things, but they have pushed legislation that insulated and expanded the use of surety bonds within the past 20 years. So during the same time that we're all like, hey, the war on drugs is considered an epic policy failure. We know that we're systematically and racially putting certain groups of people in cages. We've also had this commercial industry that's been going to different legislatures, expanding the use of surety bonds, expanding our, contributing to our reliance on cash bonds, and making this industry what it is. So as you mentioned, I think we should definitely rely on some of our international counterparts on abiding by this notion of pretrial liberty and making it true.
As well as maybe local municipalities stop relying on cash bail as part of their income.
I'd like to share a quick anecdote. I have learned the bail project that just in July came here to Cleveland has been operating in New York City, so they have a lot of data on the track record of that. And what that is someone who will forward the money for their bonds so people can be released, and then a person from the bail project stays in relationship with them and encourages them to return and that sort of thing. We've been doing court watching, the bail reform group has, and I had an opportunity to talk to one of the municipal court judges, and I told her that the data from New York City is really interesting, that people return to court at least as much, if not more, when someone else puts up the money for their bail. So this belief that judges in our society have, that people need to have a money stake, particularly when you're poor, in order to ensure you return to jail, the data does not bear that out. People will return if they get appropriate reminders not set to the license on their, or to the address on their license, which may be 4 years old and out of date, but rather get texts onto their phone with current information. That's another reform that we're advocating for.
Thank you, all of the panel members, for a very interesting discussion this morning on an issue that I suspect most people don't know much about. My question, and I think we sort of opened the door just a minute ago, if this becomes a public issue, well, it's a public issue now, but I mean one where it becomes debated and highly visible, who are the advocacy groups that are going to line up in opposing any kind of bail reform besides the insurance industry? And I know ALEC, but ALEC isn't really an advocacy group. They just write the legislation in the most inhumane ways possible. But I'm talking about other groups that would line up with the insurance industry and say, yeah, we need to keep this current system. And do we know how groups like chiefs of police or county or sheriffs as a group feel about it?
I think one interesting aspect is it doesn't necessarily fall on partisan lines the way that you might think. So I feel like other people know more about this than I do. Can somebody speak to that? Some of the strange bedfellows here?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, it's bipartisan in a way. There's Republicans and Democrats that really want bail reform, usually for different reasons, but the end result is more important than motive. But like for instance, there are Republicans say this is too much spending.
Yeah.
No, libertarians are like that also. So there's different reasons bipartisan. As far as organizations that may have a problem with this, I would say the Hoover Institution maybe. There's probably some others. They want to be the way it is.
So from my experience, just doing this advocacy within the past 2 years, it really hasn't been as much of the bail bond industry. I mean, they still have a significant role and they're still the loudest voices in the room, but probably the most powerful are judges themselves. Not because judges don't necessarily believe in pretrial liberty, but this idea of, let's say I release somebody and they commit another crime. So now I won't be reelected and I'm considered soft on crime in this issue. So there's a lot of fear-mongering language, there's a lot of war on crime, war on drugs, mentality that gets put into the situation. Also prosecutors, because as Lori mentioned before, if you're held pre-trial, you're 3 to 4 times more likely to receive a jail or prison sentence, and those sentences are 3 to 4 times longer than someone who had been released. So prosecutors are winning cases. They're using this as a mechanism, again, to coerce people into taking plea deals, good or bad, and it adds to their record in a positive way. So prosecutors, judges, and the bail bond industry are probably the loudest, the loudest opposition. In terms of sheriffs, there have been sheriffs and police that are very much pro bail reform in New Jersey. For instance, the police and the culture change that bail reform has instigated, because they're saying, well, I arrest someone and then they're automatically getting released. So maybe this should alter my interaction, my encounter with folks, and they're also relying more on citation and release as opposed to just simply arresting them. So it's kind of instigated this entire culture change around how the police interact with people and what should we deem arrestable, quote unquote. But in terms of Ohio, we're not seeing the kind of widespread police and law enforcement support that I would like. I think that's going to be a very slow and ongoing process of partnership. But judges, prosecutors, and the bail bond industry.
And maybe the unaware public. I've talked to people about this who begin with, they must have done something wrong. They are right where they belong, without understanding the dynamics that we have discussed here this morning. And so now that you are an educated public, talk to people. Tell them the truth.
Yes, Mr. Crosby, how similar is imprisonment to slavery, and how does imprisonment and slavery relate to the 13th Amendment?
As far as imprisonment and slavery in relation to the 13th Amendment, when the slaves were free based on the 13th Amendment, there was one clause in there. If you are convicted of a crime, you can be enslaved. That's why right after slavery, you had convict leasing and things like that, where ex-convicts were working on plantations or fixing roads and chain gangs and things of that sort. In layman terms, the main difference between prison and slavery in 2019 is, one, you can't go free. Two, plenty of prisons are privatized now, which is similar to convict leasing in a way. And when they're privatized and when you're in prison, they don't have to pay you minimum wage. So they might pay you pennies on the dollar. So don't be surprised within the next 10 years, you're gonna see convicts making your sneakers and things like that.
And also, once you've been in prison to be employed, so it's like the rate of recidivism. Making sure I'm getting that right. Recidivism, where it's like you get out, you don't have the same opportunities based on your record. You're more likely to commit a crime again and be set back in.
Also, once you, if you're having even an individualized bail assessment, at that point, you have a record, right? You've already been arrested once, and that makes you that much more likely to receive further punishment.
Yes, in the justice system, they're not very forgiving for returning citizens or convicted felons. If you commit a crime and it happens to happen again, they don't want to help you with anything. And even if it happens once, they don't want to help you with anything. They don't believe in the mistake system. And so if you can't feed your family, can't take care of your children, and you can't get a good job, you can't even work at certain McDonald's won't even hire felons no more. So it's to the point now they feel they have to do something to feed themselves and feed their family, which could cause you to commit another crime.
And again, just to add on the amazing things my colleagues have articulated, it's instituting this loss of freedom on so many levels. So in the state of Ohio, we have 850 collateral consequences for somebody with a felony conviction. So you can't get a certain license, you can't get money for education. There are so many individual and mounting obstacles to living the life that you want to live, to flourishing, simply because you have a felony conviction. So again, I think it directly relates back to this 13th Amendment, directly relates back to slavery, because we're instituting the kind of denial of freedoms and this loss of flourishing and this really oppression, and allowing this underclass of people to exist because they have felony convictions. Even if, as we've seen and we've talked about, they couldn't pay their bail and they accepted a felony conviction on their record to get out of jail. So perpetuating this criminalization of poverty at its root.
I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book that I think you mentioned, The New Jim Crow, which should be mandatory reading certainly for everybody here. It's just absolutely mind-boggling and eye-opening. And one of the things two things that I think are related. One is that we've known from government household studies for the last 10 years that the majority of illicit drug use in the United States is committed by Anglos. whereas probably 85% of the people that are in prison for illicit drug use are black or Hispanic. So there's this incredible differential enforcement, number one, and number two, which I wasn't aware of, that a lot of people with poor to no legal representation are induced to cop a plea in order to avoid the risk of mandatory minimum sentencing, with the result that lots and lots of people just pled guilty and for the rest of their lives can't vote. Can you talk about that as an issue, this whole issue of people, because they're poor, being coerced to plead guilty when maybe they aren't?
Yes, I do wanna clarify though, in Ohio, convicted felons can't vote.
But in other states.
In other states they can't, but in Ohio, they can vote in some states, so it's not all the way across the board. But a lot of people here do not know, even convicted felons, some of them don't know they can vote. So they're not doing their civic duty or don't wanna do it, so I need to clarify that. Yes, what you said is part of racial dynamic in America, because, for instance, if you're a convicted felon and you're Caucasian, you still have a better chance to get a job than certain black college graduates with no record. So there's a big racial dynamic here, and that's one of the things that the hearts and minds of people, the public has to be aware of that. And that's not gonna really change till the hearts and minds of people change. I don't know what kind of legislation you can make that's gonna transform and transmogrify that situation.
I think, Alex wanted to say something.
And just a side note, money makes the mark here. You have money to pay your way out for something very egregious, you don't sit in jail. You don't have that mark on your record. That's not going to, impact you down the line as much as somebody who might have been languishing in jail for 8 to 10 days. And I mean, that's just, sometimes that can be even a conservative estimate. Some people can spend up to like weeks, months. I mean, I've read horror stories about this kind of stuff.
Someone had asked about the opposition, and I think one important thing we have to remember is that in the current system, there's already a very substantial failure to appear rate. In congregations is we don't win an issue because we're right or because it's just. We win an issue because we find common ground, even from people with different ideas. And I think the common ground for a lot is cost. Several people have brought that up. There's a lot of cost on a failure to appear. The court time, they have everybody there, the judges, the bailiffs, the attorneys, the law enforcement officers who take time off away from the streets to come in, and someone doesn't show up. That's a lot of cost. They issue a warrant. When a person gets to the top of the list, from the warrant list, they send out a team. They have 3 vehicles, 8 deputies, a dog, for 4 hours. There's a lot of cost. In a lot of our cases, especially drug cases, we might have an average of 3 different episodes with a failure to appear, warrants, rearrest. That's tens of thousands of dollars that are being spent on a case that will ultimately have a final outcome with a $100 fine. And we've spent tens of thousands of dollars to bring that person in and have them spend 3 months in jail waiting to get that $100 fine when they do a plea bargain. Okay, so I think the common ground is cost. It's cheaper. Somebody said the reminders have been proven effective. They really do work. Some jurisdictions take a van and go pick people up. Some jurisdictions place people in treatment where the treatment providers have case management services. They do the reminders. They take responsibility for bringing the people. They transport them.
What's your question?
So the question is, what can we do to get all the stakeholders together and address this common ground and seek the solution?
No, I think that was very beautifully said. The fiscal cost of keeping people in jail and then the cost of actually remedying this failure to appear issue is something that we talk about a lot with opposing stakeholders. Something that I don't mention as much when I speak in public, but this is something that I think the opposition can definitely coalesce around. Bail does not make us safer. Because we're giving people a moneyed amount to get released, it's actually creating a situation where somebody who may be actually dangerous, who does pose a significant risk to the community, if they have the funds, they could get out. So actually you're making your communities less safe by relying on the system, because somebody with money can get out for somebody who poses no risk at all and just doesn't have the money to pay. Perhaps they go to jail and they're, re-traumatized, and they're more likely to actually commit a crime because they're, lingering in the kind of trauma and terror that they've experienced being held pre-trial. So I think those two aspects that you mentioned, the fiscal component and also the public safety component. Why I don't really like to bring up public safety as much when we have these conversations is because people are still relying on messaging frameworks of black men being more dangerous. So that's why it's like, you know, we have these conversations and I want to bring up public safety, but I also don't want people to activate the kind of frameworks of who is dangerous, who is at risk, who deserves to be arrested, and what does arrest, you know, mean? Because for a lot of folks, arrest means you're guilty. Arrest means you've done something wrong and that you, for some reason, deserve to be put in a cage and you deserve to experience the punitive consequences of doing that. But that's not the reality as we've seen. I also think that it requires constituents to go to their representatives and say, this is an issue that I care about. This isn't just an issue for lawyers, this isn't just an issue for those within the progressive community. This is my community, these are people who are being held within my community, and it's really on the public to go and say, hey, this matters to me. And Alex mentioned the toolkit that you can download. It gives you sample language of petitions, letters, social media, talking points, more information, just, you know, research studies, just more information to read about this issue. Because it's kind of fascinating when you get into the wonky pieces of it. But ultimately, I think it will depend on coalescing behind that shared interest of fiscal cost and public safety and constituent interest.
I would like to add something also, that I think that there's also a cost in having this really pretty large population of people who have essentially been excluded from the economy. And we in Cleveland are very fond of gazing at our navels and wondering, like, how can we make Cleveland thrive? Well, when you have thousands and thousands of people for whom you've made it impossible for them to succeed economically, how is that helping our community? You know, I think that that's another aspect of it, and one that I hope will be raised more consistently in these conversations about what do we do to make Cleveland thrive. One way is to end mass incarceration.
The cost does not exist on an island. You know, two things that you want to hammer home as far as like the commonality of this issue: taxpayer money. Nationally, it's $32 million cost to U.S. taxpayers. Second thing you want to hammer home: the constitutionality, the 8th Amendment prohibiting excessive bail. Everybody has a right, you know, to not have to pay that excessive bail. Like, this is fundamentally written into the document that we as Americans, you know, look to for our civil liberties. So that, combined with the cost that it's not just, you know, something that, well, the justice system, no, everybody bears the cost, because this is not something that is isolated. The $65 that it takes just for a day to give a defendant who's locked away basic amenities. Imagine that number 65 adding up over weeks, months, just for one person.
Sorry. I came in a little late, but I wanted to make 3 statements and then ask a question, just really quick. One, I worked in a juvenile state prison for 3 years. And the cost to keep a juvenile incarcerated for a life imprisonment, we used to call them the $1 million kids, because it's $250,000 a year if you counted everything. Secondly, before I came in, I read the article that Mike O'Malley convicts a highest amount of teens as adults in Cuyahoga County. And then finally, my statement is, we live in a capitalistic system. Capitalism was able to form because you had free and virtually no cost labor. So as we're having this conversation about bail reform, we're kind of talking around the elephant in the room. And the issue is, with my gentleman here who said the cost. Well, the cost is, if someone's paying, someone is receiving that payment. They are getting rich. And that is the way for capitalism. So my question is to the people up here, who are experts, is how do we address a system that's fundamentally indoctrinated in our governmental way of life and how we operate? We're talking about bail reform, but it actually just suppose making money. Someone's making money off of this. And so how do we actually really address this when the end is people are getting rich off of people going to jail?
I mean, I don't think that there's an end-all be-all to your amazing question, but I think that bail reform, to me, and what makes me so passionate about it, is I believe that bail reform is the beginning of the end of mass incarceration. If you look at what's going on in New York, bail reform was the vehicle for speedy trial reform, for discovery reform. So again, there are so many stakeholders within the system who are making money off of the fines, fees, and cash bail that people pay. There are people who are making money off of the incarceration industry that we know. There are commercial bail bond industries and also the insurance companies who are making money. And we know that this is, it's very complicated and it's a very interconnected system of relationships of people who are getting paid. But again, I think when we start at bail, we allow for speedy trial reform, making sure that people have defense counsel present in all stages of first appearance to the resolution of their case. We know we're cutting down the kind of time that people spend in jail. And I think it's the beginning of the end. Do I think that this is going to be the ultimate transformation of our society? I can't say, I don't know. But when we look at places like New Jersey, for a police officer, for every 10 people that they encounter, they give just a citation for 7 of those 10. So you're seeing that people are not even having the kind of interactions with police, or if they are, it's turning into a citation versus an arrest. So, even if we look at mandatory minimums, even if we adjust our drug policy, it's not going to produce the kind of widespread systemic changes that we'd want to see. But bail reform does. Bail reform does. And in terms of the juvenile issue, it's definitely on behalf of Prosecutor O'Malley. He should take full accountability for allowing those transfers to occur. But it's also the juvenile detention center judges, because they also have the discretion to sign off on those best interest transfers. And when we pulled those public records requests, I don't know if you saw the Cleveland.com article, some of the best interest reasoning behind it was, this person probably won't graduate, and so let me just transfer them to the JDC and there'll be quicker court processing. So the juvenile detention center judges in our county should also face the brunt of that as well.
I think we have time for one more question.
Would you discuss the relation between the amount of bail and the nature of the bail imposed and the nature of the alleged crime? Do people still get incarcerated for possession these days? And also, is there a distinction made between alleged violent crimes and nonviolent crimes?
People definitely do get arrested for possession still, but as we see, there's so many disparate arrest rates between black people and white people with those possession charges, especially for trafficking. That's something that black folks are more likely to be charged with trafficking if they have a large amount of drugs on them versus somebody who has that same amount. So that's still happening. There are distinctions for nonviolent and violent crimes also within that charging decision. And then your last question about the bond schedule and the allegation. So more or less a bond schedule is particularly arbitrary. It's just a list of charges from misdemeanors to F5s, which is the highest severity, and then it's literally just an amount that follows that severity level. And we didn't mention bond schedules in this presentation, but they're a huge part of this. Every municipality in Cuyahoga County has a different bond schedule. So I could be picked up for petty theft in Parma, maybe have a $300 bill that I'm able to pay, and then I can fight the charge, maybe gets dismissed, whatever. And then if somebody else commits, or if somebody finds themselves arrested for a petty theft allegation in Cleveland Heights, their bail could be $900. So you see how bond schedules create this justice by geography dilemma, which again just points to the unconstitutionality of bond schedules itself. So again, we're advocating for individualized assessment, no reliance on bond schedules. I don't know how soon that's going to happen, but bond schedules are definitely extremely arbitrary and subject people to the same kind of bias, discrimination, and arbitrary nature of just that number that could keep you from losing your job.
Okay, I think we need to wrap it up. Does anybody need to make any sort of closing thing or something that you thought of that you just had to have said? Please.
The law begins all of this. Laws are made by people. Get to know the people who make the laws under which you live. Who are your councilmen? Who is the mayor? Has anybody ever talked to them about this problem? What district do you live in the state of Ohio? Have you called that legislator and said, I'm concerned about what bail bond, cash bail is doing to justice in Ohio? Those calls matter. And getting to know the people that make the laws that are seemingly often so unjust begin with people. Us as people holding to account the people that make the laws under which we live.
I'd like to thank you, Eileen. We all, I think, agree with that. One of the frustrations, I think, with judge accountability and doing some of the court watching and that sort of thing that the group has done is knowing that as citizens, who has time to research judges? When you go to the ballot box, there's this whole list of people. One of my frustrations in the upcoming election is that the Democratic Party has elected or has endorsed one of the worst common pleas judges in terms of track record and constitutionality and that sort of thing. Joe Russo, not to be confused with John Russo, but Joe Russo has been endorsed by the Democratic Party. He has an opponent who has an excellent rating from all of the bar associations. That's just one small example of how we as citizens can make a change by knowing what the track record of judges, as Melekta was saying, it's judges and the prosecutor who really hold the keys to so many of these things. So please do what you can to educate yourself about judges, and we are more than happy to help you with that and share the information that we have learned.
And one more thing, just housekeeping. If you want to stay involved with what's going on bail reform in Cuyahoga County and the state of Ohio, I have a sign-in sheet in the back. I also brought some literature, some cards for us, for people to look at their website, some cards for folks to submit their stories. I have my business card on there as well, so feel free to just pick all of that up.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. Next week's forum, next Sunday, November 3rd, we'll have Dr. Dorothy Sprecher, MD, and Director of the Northeast Ohio Institute of Functional Medicine, who will speak to us on dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Over 6 million Americans have dementia, including Alzheimer's, at an estimated cost of $227 billion. Can changing lifestyle factors and a highly individualized medical recode method prevent or reverse Alzheimer's disease? I guarantee that you'll learn something important from the discussion of the functional medicine approach to this disease. Also remember that our community forums at Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland are live streamed on our YouTube channel, which is UU Congregation of Cleveland. You can also find a selection of past forums. Visit youtube.com and search for UU Congregation of Cleveland to find us. Again, please feel free to join us upstairs for service, where we will continue the discussion of criminal justice reform, as well as hearing some great music. Thank you all for joining us today.